Flight security dragged black woman off next week. She blocked their expansion into Europe. A hush fell over the bustling terminal when a sudden commotion erupted at Gate 27. Tension thickened the air as flight security officers converged on a lone black woman named Brielle Fields, cornering her next to the check-in counter. Passengers whipped out their phones, capturing the scene in shaky frames. Anger, shock, and disbelief rippled through the crowd as Brielle pleaded for understanding, her voice drowned by stern commands. Within minutes, the officers pinned her arms and dragged her down the jet bridge. Little did anyone realize that this single act of injustice would spark a chain of events that would shake an entire airline to its core. Brielle Fields had traveled the world for most of her adult life, building a career around negotiating large-scale business deals. She was the kind of person who radiated confidence at the boarding gate, whether it was at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, Frankfurt, or Hong Kong. Her poise wasn't something learned in a classroom. It was forged through years of dealing with CEOs who scoffed at her young age, or board members who underestimated her capabilities just because she was a woman, let alone a black woman. On a brisk Monday morning, Brielle found herself at JFK Airport once more, ready to board Skyline Airways flight SL987 to London Heathrow. Dressed in a sleek black pantsuit, she carefully balanced her phone in one hand and a latte in the other, all while pulling a compact roller bag behind her. Her job was to meet potential European investors interested in collaborating on a new infrastructure project. She had done this thousands of times: arrive early, breeze through check-in, greet the flight attendants politely, and settle into a seat that would become her mobile office for the next 7 hours. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, Brielle couldn't shake an uneasy feeling that day. Not every moment of her travels was filled with crisp handshakes and cordial nods. She had witnessed small acts of discrimination before unpleasant run-ins with gate agents, additional random security checks that coincidentally happened to her multiple times, or even flight attendants who questioned whether she truly belonged in business class. She usually brushed them off and focused on the bigger picture, reminding herself that her presence at the table was proof of her achievements. Still, the uneasy coil in her stomach on that Monday morning felt like an omen. Skyline Airways was on the verge of something monumental. They intended to expand deeply into Europe. Rumors had been swirling around the industry for months. Some said the airline had been courting private investors from across the Atlantic to make their London and Paris hubs the largest in the region. Brielle was only tangentially involved in that conversation because her company, Prime International, specialized in global transportation infrastructure. Her job required extensive knowledge of how airlines operated, the legal frameworks that governed them, and the political intricacies of cross-border mergers. She had no personal vendetta against Skyline. In fact, she had taken their flights multiple times in the past with minimal fuss. Yet, something about her premonition loomed larger. That morning, Brielle arrived at Gate 27 to find a heavy presence of security personnel, an unusual sight for a routine international flight. She attributed it to some new airport protocol or perhaps a heightened security alert. It didn't faze her too much. However, the quick glances from uniformed officers in her direction and their whispers as she neared the seating area triggered a subtle alarm in her mind. She found a quiet seat by the window and reviewed last-minute emails from her team in London. Her phone buzzed with reminders and updates, but she paused to look up every few minutes. Each time, the eyes of the security officers were still on her. Brielle tried to shrug it off as a coincidence, but the itch of unease refused to disappear. The minutes ticked by, and passengers lined up for boarding. Brielle decided to wait for her boarding group to be called. After all, she had a business-class seat, so there was no rush to push through. Yet the more she waited, the more heightened her senses became. She noticed one officer making a call and nodding in her direction. Her heart rate quickened, but her face remained composed. It was the kind of calm she had perfected in boardrooms, a poised mask that revealed nothing of the storm brewing inside. And so, before she even stepped onto the aircraft, Brielle felt fate shift. Something was about to unfold, something that would catch everyone, including Brielle, completely off guard. Skyline Airways Flight SL-987 began boarding business-class passengers first. Brielle rose from her seat, smoothed her jacket, and moved toward the short priority line. Her heart thumped a bit louder than usual, though she told herself that was silly. She scanned her boarding pass on the machine, and the gate agent, an older man with a kind face, waved her through with a professional smile. Brielle nodded back politely and stepped toward the jet bridge. She made it about halfway down when she suddenly heard her name called out behind her. "Miss Fields! Miss Brielle Fields!" The voice belonged to a security officer, the same one who had been eyeballing her from the gate area. Brielle halted, her roller bag's wheels squeaking to an abrupt stop on the bridge floor. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Her voice measured. The officer, let's call him Officer Brandt, appeared uncomfortable. His stiff posture betrayed tension. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside for a moment." Passengers behind Brielle began to grumble, forced to stop. Whispers flitted through the narrow corridor, and several people craned their necks to see what was happening. Brielle took a deep breath, forcing a tight smile. "Certainly," she said, setting her bag to the side. Officer Brandt instructed her to walk back toward the gate area. Brielle complied, though her posture remained upright, her chin held high. She had faced countless humiliations in her life, from condescending clients to blatant prejudice, but something about this was different. This felt official, orchestrated, and much more public. When they reached the open space near the gate seating, 3 more security officers joined them, forming a semicircle around Brielle. A few people in the waiting area fished out their phones, recording or snapping photos, Brielle noticed. How could she not? The tension was so thick it felt like a solid presence looming over them. "What is the issue?" Brielle asked, her eyes darting between the officers. She could hear the boarding announcements continuing in the background. Passengers streamed past them, shooting furtive looks. The security team exchanged glances as if deciding who would speak. Finally, Brandt cleared his throat. "We received an anonymous tip that you might be carrying prohibited items." Her eyes went wide with surprise. "Prohibited items?" Brielle repeated incredulously. She had no weapons, no contraband. She traveled frequently and knew the rules. If this was about liquids, she only had her small travel bottles, all TSA approved. She even had a global entry pass, which usually expedited her security checks. One of the other officers, a woman named Officer Stein, stepped forward. "We're going to need to search your bag and your person, ma'am." Brielle tried to maintain her composure, glancing around at the gathering crowd. She swallowed her indignation. "Go ahead. I have nothing to hide," she said. Still, her voice held a tremor of frustration. The humiliating nature of the situation, especially in front of curious onlookers, made her stomach churn. Officer Stein proceeded to rummage through Brielle's carry-on. She pulled out Brielle's neatly folded documents, personal items, and laptop, placing them on a nearby chair. As minutes ticked on, Brielle could see from the corner of her eye that the flight crew was still boarding other business-class passengers. Time was running short. She was worried about missing the flight, but more importantly, worried about this tarnish on her dignity. Eventually, Officer Stein found nothing suspicious. She shook her head at the rest of the team, who then seemed to freeze in confusion. "We'll do a quick pat-down," Stein mumbled. Despite Brielle's rising anger, she forced herself to remain still as the officer patted down her arms, torso, waist, and legs. Nothing. It was all a misunderstanding. Brielle thought an anonymous tip that led to nothing. She expected an apology, or at least a semblance of courtesy. Instead, Officer Brandt looked uncertain. "We'll need you to wait here," he said. "We're clarifying some details." Brielle inhaled sharply. "You have my identification. You have my boarding pass. You've searched me. What more can I do to prove I'm not carrying anything illegal?" Brandt didn't answer. His silence was more unsettling than words could have been. That's when Brielle saw one of the gate supervisors from Skyline Airways approach. He wore a crisp uniform and an official name tag reading H. Nichols. He briefly conferred with the security officers in hushed tones. Brielle couldn't catch every word, but fragments like complaint, liability, and delay floated to her ears. Suddenly Nichols turned to Brielle, his face impassive. "Monsieur A.M., I'm afraid we can't allow you to board this flight. We're putting you on a later flight while we sort this out." "What?" Brielle's voice came out loud enough to draw the eyes of everyone within earshot. "I have a meeting in London. My company's entire strategy depends on this. I've been searched. What else do you need?" Nichols and Officer Brandt avoided eye contact, as if Brielle's presence was an inconvenience rather than a passenger with a legitimate grievance. The anger in Brielle's chest flared, but she tried to keep her tone calm. She couldn't afford an outburst. Not here, not now. A swirl of humiliation, confusion, and frustration rolled through her. She realized that in the eyes of these officers and airline staff, she was already guilty of something, even though nothing had been found. The chatter from bystanders grew. Some murmured in Brielle's defense, while others just stood there, smartphones aimed. It was only the beginning, and Brielle could sense she was on a collision course with an unmovable system determined to treat her as a problem to be removed rather than a paying passenger to be respected. Brielle felt a tremor run through her body, part outrage, part anxiety. She tried to hold her ground. Her mind raced. Could she contact a supervisor higher up in Skyline? Was there someone from her own company who could intervene? But time was too short, and she stood there, surrounded by uniformed authority figures. Escalating the situation might backfire, especially if they chose to interpret her frustration as a threat. Nevertheless, Brielle couldn't remain silent. "I've done nothing wrong," she said firmly, turning to the gate supervisor, "Mr. Nichols. If you won't let me board, I need a written explanation. I need the reason in writing so I can take it up with your corporate offices." Nichols hesitated, then stammered, "We will provide a document that you were removed due to a security concern." That statement felt like a slap. Security concern was a vague phrase that implied guilt without specifics. Brielle's cheeks burned. She wanted to shout that this was blatant discrimination, but she also knew that if she started using loaded terms, she could be labeled angry or aggressive, further justifying their actions. A crowd of onlookers, some still lined up for the flight, watched with fascination and horror. A few steps away, a middle-aged woman with a rolling suitcase whispered, "This is ridiculous." "She's clearly harmless." Another passenger, a young man in glasses, shook his head, muttering, "They're doing this because she's black, huh?" Their murmurs only served to heighten the tension. Brielle locked eyes with Officer Brandt. She saw something flicker there, hesitation, guilt, or maybe just the discomfort of being in such a public standoff. "I need to speak to someone higher up," Brielle demanded, her voice controlled but forceful. "This is unacceptable." At that moment, an older gentleman in a dark suit approached. He wore a badge that said Operations Manager. His name, pinned on a silver plate, was Raymond Finch. He walked up briskly, took in the scene, and nodded for the security officers to step back. He then spoke quietly to Brielle, though still loud enough for others to overhear. "Miss Fields, the first understand this is frustrating. I've been informed that there was a security tip involving your name, and while they found nothing, the process has triggered a flag in our system. If we allow you to board, we could be in violation of certain protocols. I'm sorry, but we must recheck everything. It's for everyone's safety." Brielle opened her mouth to respond, but the anger clogged her throat. "Everyone's safety," she finally managed. "From a woman in a business suit, carrying only a laptop and travel documents. Is that really your official stance?" Finch's gaze dropped. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to do my job and protect the airline from liability. I can place you on a flight later today, or even tomorrow morning, once we clear this up. We're not trying to ruin your day, but we have rules to follow." Brielle's eyes glistened with tears of rage she refused to let fall. She could see that she was losing precious time for her London meeting, and these people showed no concern about her professional obligations or her dignity. "My day is already ruined," she said quietly. Finch sighed. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Turning around, Brielle saw that many of the other passengers had already boarded. The gate was now nearly empty, except for a few stragglers, and the glint of mobile phones still recording. The next thing Brielle knew, Officer Brandt was telling her, "We need you to clear out of this area now, Miss Fields." That's when everything escalated. Finch turned to consult with Nichols for a moment. It happened in an instant. Brielle, incensed, decided to stand her ground. "No," she said, voice trembling with fury, "I'm not leaving. Not until I get my official explanation or a chance to speak with someone at corporate." A visible wave of panic swept over the staff. Finch hissed something under his breath. Nichols grabbed a walkie-talkie and spoke rapidly into it. Suddenly, half a dozen more security personnel materialized, forming a tighter ring around Brielle. She was no threat, she was just a single passenger, smaller than some of these officers, yet their posture was as if they were preparing for a violent suspect. Before Brielle could process what was happening, multiple hands gripped her arms. Her carry-on bag was knocked over, and the contents of her laptop case spilled onto the floor with a harsh thud. Brielle gasped, struggling to maintain her balance. A few startled cries rang out from bystanders. "What are you doing?" someone yelled. Phones were everywhere now, capturing the sight of Brielle being forcefully held by men in uniform who towered over her. She wanted to fight them off, but she also knew that any physical resistance would only provide them an excuse to claim she was resisting arrest or disorderly. "Stop!" Brielle shouted, her voice echoing through the corridor. "You're hurting me!" Somebody in the distance hollered, "This is insane!" Another person cried, "Let her go!" And then Brielle felt the sharp sting of her knees scraping the floor as the officers wrestled her downward. All the while, Brielle could see a wave of horror on the faces of onlookers. She thought of her mother's lessons about dignity, about not letting others define you by stereotypes. But at that moment, Brielle's entire identity was being stomped upon by a system that saw only a threat, or at best, a nuisance to be removed. The sting of humiliation seared her mind. Dragged forcibly, Brielle could barely register Finch's or Nichols's faces anymore. The humiliating spectacle ended with Brielle lying on the floor, her arms pinned behind her back, surrounded by a circle of phone cameras. The swirl of shame, anger, and despair crashed over her like a tidal wave. She heard the thrumming of her heartbeat in her ears, louder than any of the outraged shouts or the mechanical boarding announcements droning overhead. In that moment, Brielle Fields, a respected professional with a spotless record, felt powerless. In the days to come, the entire world would witness what happened at Gate 27 as those videos started circling online within hours. Little did Skyline Airways staff know, the fallout of that day would rock their company far beyond a simple PR scandal. Within 24 hours, footage of Brielle's ordeal had exploded across social media platforms. Early clips appeared on Twitter, posted by outraged fellow passengers who couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. Someone stitched together multiple angles of the confrontation, from the moment security demanded Brielle step aside to the harrowing image of her being pinned to the floor. The video garnered millions of views in just a day, accompanied by hashtags like hashtag Brielle Fields, Flying While Black, and hashtag Skyline Scandal. Mainstream news outlets picked up the story by the next morning. Local stations, then national networks, broadcast interviews with eyewitnesses who described how Brielle, calmly waiting to board, was singled out and forcibly removed. A few of them had even tried to reason with the security officers, though no one listened. A collage of Brielle's anguished face, her outstretched arms, and the uniformed officers restraining her ran on a loop during primetime news segments. Public sentiment quickly turned against Skyline Airways. Meanwhile, Brielle herself was in a whirlwind of legal consultations, personal turmoil, and media requests. She spent the night after the incident at a nearby airport hotel, her mind spinning with disbelief. She had missed her crucial London meeting. Her phone overflowed with calls and messages from colleagues, family, friends, and random well-wishers who had seen the story online. Her mother's voice, shaky from worry, urged Brielle to come home and rest, but Brielle couldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the security officer's hands pushing her down, the frightened looks from passengers, and the endless camera phones capturing her moment of humiliation for the entire world to see. In the midst of it all, Brielle learned that Skyline had released a terse statement to the media. "We regret any inconvenience caused to our passengers. Skyline Airways follows stringent safety protocols and must act on every security tip we receive. Our employees strive to make travel safe and comfortable for all customers, and we take any concerns seriously. We are conducting a thorough investigation." That carefully crafted corporate response felt like a slap in the face. It implied Brielle was an inconvenience and gave no meaningful acknowledgement of wrongdoing or apology. Online, celebrities, activists, and everyday travelers lambasted Skyline's hollow statement. Big names in entertainment voiced support for Brielle, calling for boycotts until the airline was held accountable. Civil rights organizations also released statements demanding transparency and justice. As the days wore on, Brielle found herself on the receiving end of an unexpected deluge of supportive messages from high-profile figures in politics and business. Even a few senators tweeted about the incident, calling for an investigation into discriminatory practices by airlines. Brielle's personal brand, once modest, suddenly soared. She was no longer just Brielle Fields, the behind-the-scenes negotiator. She had become a symbol of a larger conversation about systemic bias in the travel industry. Yet, with that new notoriety came stress and new responsibilities. Journalists camped outside her apartment building in Manhattan, eager for a quote or a glimpse. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News anchors wanting an exclusive, PR firms offering to manage her image, lawyers proposing lawsuits against Skyline for wrongful removal. Brielle felt torn between the instinct to protect her privacy and the compelling need to stand up for justice, not just for herself, but for anyone who'd been mistreated similarly. In a matter of days, Brielle's life was transformed from a corporate professional with a bright future to an embattled figure in the middle of a raging public storm. Little did she know that her personal predicament would soon intertwine with a much larger drama, Skyline Airways' high-stakes expansion plan into Europe, and the hidden power Brielle had to shape their fate. While public opinion turned against Skyline Airways in the United States, the airline's corporate leadership scrambled to manage the crisis from their global headquarters in Chicago. The CEO, Alan Carlisle, called an emergency board meeting. Around a long mahogany table overlooking the city skyline, executives from legal, PR, and operations gathered in a tense silence. A giant screen at the end of the room replayed news segments and social media posts lambasting Skyline for its handling of Brielle's case. Carlyle's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arm of his leather chair. He turned to his head of security, a stern man named Colonel Marcus White, who had been responsible for implementing the airline's stringent security measures. "Explain to me how a single anonymous tip leads to this fiasco," Carlyle demanded. "We've never had an incident escalate like this in full public view, and now it's gone viral, jeopardizing our brand, our stock prices, and our expansion plans." Colonel White cleared his throat. "Sir, we followed protocol. We received a tip from an unverified source that the passenger Miss Fields matched the profile of someone who intended to bring a prohibited item on board. Our ground security team took action. It's unfortunate how things turned out, but from a policy standpoint, they did what they were trained to do." Carlyle slammed a fist on the table. "That's not good enough. The world sees it as racial profiling. We're hemorrhaging money as we speak. Sponsors are pulling out from our next advertising campaign. Passengers are cancelling flights. Stocks are down 2 points in early trading. We need a better response than we followed policy." Karen Baines, the airline's chief communications officer, shifted uncomfortably. "Public outcry is enormous. We need to release a statement that acknowledges wrongdoing, or at least conveys empathy. Our current stance seems cold, and it's inflaming public sentiment. Also, there's a rumor that Brielle Fields has high-level connections in the European Commission. She works with Prime International, which is known to have close ties with EU regulators on infrastructure and transportation matters. If that rumor is true, this could affect our expansion into London, Paris, even Berlin." Carlyle's face went pale. "We're in the final stages of lobbying for new routes to Heathrow and Charles de Gaulle. A negative recommendation from the European Commission could derail everything. We can't afford a meltdown right before we're set to finalize those deals." Across the table, the CFO, Gina Huang, looked just as worried. "Skyline has invested millions in marketing to position us as the go-to transatlantic airline. If Miss Fields has influence in those regulatory bodies, we might be facing more than a PR disaster. We could lose the entire European market." A hush settled over the room. Finally, Carlyle turned to Baines. "Draft a more sincere apology, something that shows we're taking corrective action. Get PR to hold a press conference if necessary. Colonel, the first need you to figure out exactly who made that tip and why it targeted Miss Fields. I want to know if there's any hidden motive, or if this is a rival airline's sabotage. And for God's sake, we need to reach out to Brielle Fields directly. We need to calm the storm before it destroys us." Colonel White gave a curt nod, but his expression was grim. The fiasco had begun, and it was clear that merely addressing the public outrage might not be enough. Somewhere behind the scenes, Brielle Fields herself could very well hold the key to halting Skyline's European ambitions, or letting them proceed unscathed. As the meeting ended, Carlyle retreated to his corner office, staring at the city below. He had always prided himself on steering the airline through turbulent times, a rising fuel cost here, a pilot strike there, but this felt different. This was personal, emotional, and global, and he feared that Brielle Fields would become the most formidable opponent Skyline Airways had ever faced. Far from the heated boardroom at Skyline's headquarters, Brielle sat in the modest living room of her Manhattan apartment. Though she worked for Prime International, she had deliberately chosen a simple, cozy space to call home a calming sanctuary after hectic work trips. Now, the walls felt like they were closing in on her. News reporters camped outside, her phone rang incessantly, and she received an onslaught of emails, some supportive, others hostile or suspicious. She was in no mood for guests when the doorbell rang that afternoon. However, Upon checking the peephole, she saw a familiar face, Rachel Jefferson, an old friend from Brielle's college days at Howard University. Rachel was also a prominent civil rights attorney who had made headlines for winning several discrimination cases. Brielle opened the door, the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Rachel enveloped Brielle in a comforting hug. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Brielle managed a half smile. "Thank you for coming. Feels like everything's happening at once." Rachel followed Brielle into the living room, where the coffee table was strewn with laptop cords, press releases, and half-finished cups of herbal tea. Rachel sat down, scanning the documents. "Looks like you have quite a storm on your hands. And it's not just about you anymore. This is about challenging a system that let that happen." Brielle slumped onto the couch. "I never wanted to be some kind of symbol. I just wanted to do my job. But now people are calling me an activist, a fighter for justice. Maybe I should be grateful for the support, but it's overwhelming. And the airline's official statement is a joke. No real apology, no acceptance of wrongdoing." Rachel nodded. "I've been in touch with some advocacy groups. They want to support you in any lawsuit you might file. Have you talked to your employers at Prime International yet?" Brielle exhaled. "Not fully. I spoke to my immediate boss, who was horrified, but the higher-ups are concerned about the negative PR. They haven't come out strongly on my behalf, but they haven't discouraged me either. It's complicated. Prime International does a lot of work with transportation companies, including airlines like Skyline." Rachel picked up a folder from the table. "What's all this?" Brielle rubbed her temples. "Documents related to my next project in Europe. We were supposed to finalize a partnership with government agencies to improve airport terminals across the continent. Part of the project includes evaluating which airlines get prime access to the new gates. And guess which airline is one of the frontrunners?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Skyline Airways." Brielle nodded. "So they forcibly remove me from a flight and humiliate me. Then, ironically, I might have a say in their access to European airports." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on Brielle's arm. "That's significant leverage. But don't let them push you around. You have the moral high ground. If they try to bully or bribe you, the public will side with you. You have an entire movement at your back now." Brielle sighed, looking at her phone lighting up with new messages. "That's what scares me. I didn't sign up for a movement, but I also can't ignore what happened. I'm tired of feeling powerless." Rachel stood, pacing around the small room. "If you decide to push back legally, publicly count me in. I can rally top legal minds, civil rights organizations, and we can make this a watershed case for how passengers are treated. Especially passengers of color." Brielle gazed at Rachel, gratitude mixing with apprehension. "Thank you. Let's take it one step at a time, though. I need to figure out what Skyline is going to do next. And I have a job to do in Europe. I can't let my personal battles overshadow the responsibilities I have to my company and the people who depend on these infrastructure deals." Rachel nodded, understanding Brielle's predicament. "Then do your job. But remember, you don't have to do it alone. You have allies. And if Skyline thinks they can bury this, they're in for a surprise." They hugged again, a quiet promise lingering in the air. Together, they would face the mammoth entity that was Skyline Airways and a travel industry riddled with biases. It was a heavy weight to carry, but Brielle felt a glimmer of hope with Rachel by her side, an ally who believed in justice and, more importantly, believed in Brielle's strength, even when Brielle herself struggled to find it. 3 days later, Brielle was on a flight to London, this time on a competitor's airline that offered her a complimentary ticket after hearing of her ordeal. She needed to attend a crucial roundtable discussion at the European Commission headquarters in Brussels regarding the modernization of major airports, including London Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, and Frankfurt International. Prime International had been tasked with presenting a feasibility study on gate expansions and runway upgrades, and Brielle was part of the core team. The flight was uneventful, for which Brielle was grateful. She spent most of the 7-hour trip reviewing her notes, rechecking financial projections, and mentally preparing herself for the role she would play in the discussions. The humiliating event with Skyline still weighed on her mind, but Brielle knew she had to remain professional. The fate of multi-billion-dollar projects hinged on her ability to separate personal emotion from business logic. Upon arrival in London, Brielle found a sedan waiting to whisk her to the 5-star hotel where Prime International had arranged accommodations. City lights flickered as she travelled through the bustling streets of central London. During the drive, Brielle's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, an email from the European Commission's Transportation Committee. She felt a surge of anticipation. The subject line read, "Possible conflict of interest regarding Skyline Airways." Brielle frowned as she opened it. The email politely stated that certain members of the committee had become aware of Brielle's altercation with Skyline Airways in the United States. They acknowledged Brielle's qualifications and role, but expressed concern that her personal dispute might cast a shadow over any official decisions involving Skyline's expansion proposals in Europe. They requested a private meeting to discuss the matter before the General Conference. Brielle's pulse quickened. She recognized this could be a chance to clarify her side of the story. However, she also knew that stepping into that meeting meant revealing more details of an incident that had traumatized her, possibly making her a target for those who might question her impartiality. Arriving at her hotel, Brielle was greeted by polite staff who escorted her to a sleek executive suite overlooking the Thames. She dropped her bags, took a moment to freshen up, and dialed her boss at Prime International, Geoffrey Wallace. "Jeff, I landed safely," she began. "Listen, the Commission has asked me to address the Skyline situation privately. They want to ensure I can remain unbiased in evaluating their proposal." Wallace sighed on the other end. "Brielle, I trust your professionalism, but this is exactly what we were worried about. Skyline is one of the largest bidders for these new gates, and we stand to gain significantly if they're approved for expansions. Our contracts could skyrocket. But if you appear partial against them," Brielle interjected, "I was the one assaulted, Jeff. Let's not twist it." His voice softened. "I'm sorry, Brielle. I know, it's just corporate politics. We can't afford to lose the contract. Do what you must, but please keep the bigger picture in mind." The call ended, leaving Brielle teetering between personal pain and professional responsibility. She took a deep breath and decided that she wouldn't hide the truth. If the Commission wanted to know what happened, she would tell them calmly and factually. If Skyline's expansion faced hurdles because of its own discriminatory conduct, then so be it. Brielle refused to carry their guilt on her shoulders. This was their mess. That night, as she prepared for the days ahead, Brielle wrote down everything she needed to convey to the European Commission officials: the factual timeline of events, her willingness to remain impartial if Skyline corrected its course, and her unwavering stance that no company should gain from practices that humiliate or discriminate against innocent passengers. In that moment, Brielle realized she held more power than she initially understood. For once, the system that had knocked her down might have to reckon with the woman it underestimated. 2 days later, Brielle arrived at the European Commission's headquarters in Brussels. A grand stone facade opened into a modern interior, buzzing with diplomats, lawyers, and corporate lobbyists. She navigated the corridors until she reached the private conference room where her meeting was to take place. Inside waited 5 individuals: Commissioner Anna Bourdieu, 2 legal advisors from the Commission, and 2 industry experts. They greeted Brielle with polite courtesy, offering her a seat at a round table scattered with documents and laptops. "Thank you for meeting with us on short notice, Miss Fields, Commissioner Bourdieu began, her French accent lending a refined edge to her words. We appreciate your cooperation in what could be a delicate matter. Brielle nodded, folding her hands on the table. I understand. I'm here to clarify any concerns you might have. The Commissioner leaned forward. We've received a formal bid from Skyline Airways to expand heavily into Heathrow Airport, as well as secondary hubs throughout the EU. Given your role at Prime International, you have a voice in shaping our infrastructure recommendations. However, we are aware of the incident at JFK Airport, in which you were forcibly removed from a Skyline flight. We need to ascertain whether you can remain objective, or if you intend to oppose Skyline's application due to personal grievances. Brielle took a measured breath. I'll be honest, what happened to me was deeply traumatic. I was physically dragged from a plane, humiliated in front of dozens of passengers, all based on a bogus anonymous tip that turned out to be completely false. So, yes, I have personal feelings about the way Skyline handled the situation. But my role here is professional. I'm responsible for providing a thorough, evidence-based assessment of their bid finances, route viability, safety records, passenger satisfaction, etc. If they meet or exceed all benchmarks, I'm prepared to reflect that objectively in my analysis. One of the legal advisors, a German man with wire-rimmed glasses, interjected, "How do we know your personal experience won't color your recommendations?" Brielle steeled her gaze. "Because my professional integrity matters more to me than any personal vendetta. I don't deny what happened, but I also believe companies can learn from their mistakes if they choose to. I won't stand in the way of progress out of spite. However, if I see red flags that mirror the negligence or discrimination I experienced, I won't hesitate to flag them." Commissioner Bourdieu exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Thank you. That is a clear stance. We appreciate transparency. We also want you to know that if Skyline's actions violate EU anti-discrimination laws, that itself can be grounds for reconsidering their expansion bid." Brielle nodded. "I'm aware of that. My employer, Prime International, is well versed in those regulations. We have a strong track record of ethical compliance." The Commissioner offered a small smile. "We will proceed with the official infrastructure discussions in the coming days. In the meantime, we expect to hear from Skyline's representatives too. They've requested an opportunity to defend their record and address any public criticisms. We'll keep you informed." Brielle rose, shook hands with each member, and left the conference room feeling a subtle shift in her spirit. The Commission wasn't just going to rubber-stamp Skyline's proposals, not after such a high-profile scandal. Whether Brielle ended up giving a favourable or unfavourable evaluation, one thing was certain: Skyline had lost the free pass they might have enjoyed before. And Brielle had seized a chance to uphold her integrity without denying the hurt she had suffered. Back in Chicago, Skyline Airways' top brass was in disarray. The PR disaster had not subsided. If anything, it had gotten worse. The footage of Brielle being dragged off the flight continued to fuel online debates, news segments, and late-night talk show monologues. Passengers were cancelling bookings, and a few major investors threatened to withdraw funding if the situation wasn't resolved swiftly and convincingly. CEO Alan Carlisle summoned his inner circle to strategize. Colonel White was there, along with Chief Communications Officer Karen Baines, CFO Gina Huang, and a newly hired crisis manager, a stoic man named Derek Linton, who had a history of handling corporate scandals, albeit none quite like this. Derek Linton wasted no time. "We need to meet with Miss Fields, apologize, offer her some form of restitution. This cannot drag on. The longer it does, the more damage to our brand." Colonel White scoffed. "So we just hand her a settlement? Let her hold us hostage?" Karen Baines frowned. It's not about hostage-taking, it's about doing what's right. We already look like villains to the public. A genuine, face-to-face apology could go a long way. Carlyle massaged his temples. We tried releasing statements. We got nowhere. Our phone calls and emails to Miss Field's representation haven't gotten a response. We might have to fly out to see her in person. Huang tapped her pen anxiously on the table. I also heard from a contact in Brussels that Brielle Fields is now involved in the review of our bid to expand at Heathrow. If she testifies against us, pointing out any operational or ethical failings, it could sway the Commission's decision. Derek nodded. Exactly. That's why we need to smooth things over. If we show sincerity, perhaps Miss Fields might be less inclined to highlight our faults. However, I recommend we don't try to bribe or threaten her. That would only blow up in our faces. We need to approach her with actual accountability, a real plan to fix the issues that led to this incident in the first place. Colonel White leaned back, crossing his arms. All due respect, but we still haven't identified the source of that anonymous tip. It could have been a malicious act by a competitor or a disgruntled employee. We're missing pieces. Carlyle's patience was wearing thin. Keep investigating, Colonel. But for now, we focus on Brielle. Find out where she's staying in London or Brussels. I'll personally speak to her if I have to. Within hours, Colonel White's security team discovered Brielle was at a hotel in London, prepping for the next phase of EU Commission talks. Carlyle decided he would fly there himself. The mission was simple yet fraught with tension, attempt to secure Brielle's forgiveness, or at least her neutrality, before the Commission's final hearings. As Carlyle's private jet departed from O'Hare, he brooded over what he could possibly say to Brielle Fields. How do you apologize for a wrong so public, so humiliating, and so deeply tied to the broader issues of racial discrimination? He had no easy answers. But he understood one thing: without Brielle's cooperation, or at least her willingness to stay impartial, Skyline's future in Europe might be dead on arrival. Brielle had just finished a working lunch with some European Commission officials when she received a message from the hotel concierge. Mr. Alan Carlyle, CEO of Skyline Airways, requests a meeting. Her stomach churned. Part of her wanted to refuse outright. Another part recognized the significance of such a meeting. This was the man at the helm of the airline that had wronged her so profoundly. After a moment's deliberation, Brielle instructed the concierge to set up a meeting in one of the hotel's private lounges. She figured a controlled, neutral environment was safest. Hours later, she walked into the lounge, her posture rigid, her expression guarded. Seated on a leather armchair was Alan Carlyle, tall and silver-haired, looking more anxious than the powerful executive Brielle had seen in corporate magazines. Carlyle stood, extending a hand she hesitated to shake. Reluctantly, she gave a brief handshake and sat across from him. He cleared his throat. "Miss Fields, thank you for agreeing to see me." Brielle folded her arms. "Your people have been trying to contact me. I avoided them because I had nothing more to say until I heard you came in person. So, what do you want?" Carlyle sighed, choosing his words carefully. "First, an apology, a genuine one. On behalf of Skyline Airways, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you. The physical and emotional harm you endured is unacceptable. I'm not here to excuse our actions, only to acknowledge that the situation was handled terribly." Brielle's face remained impassive, but her hands clenched on her lap. "That's a start. But words are cheap. Skyline has dragged its feet on a real apology for weeks." His eyes flickered with regret. "I know. We were too concerned with legal liabilities, stock prices, and the chaos that followed. We lost sight of the human side of this. I can't change the past, but I can pledge to implement changes to prevent such an incident from happening again." Brielle listened quietly, recalling every humiliating second, the sting of being pinned to the floor. What about the officers who dragged me off? Have they been fired, disciplined, anything? Carlyle nodded. An internal investigation is ongoing. Preliminary findings suggest the tip that flagged you was not only unverified, but may have been deliberately fabricated to single you out. We suspect a malicious intent, though we don't know by whom yet. Once the investigation concludes, those responsible for your removal will face consequences. Silence filled the lounge. Brielle stared at Carlyle, gauging his sincerity. Finally, she spoke. Do you really think that will fix what happened to me? Or fix your company's culture? Carlyle's gaze didn't waver. It's a start. We plan on revising our security protocols, mandating new anti-discrimination training for all staff, and establishing a clearer process for verifying tips. But, Miss Fields, I also know none of that erases your trauma. Brielle exhaled, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her wanted to lash out, to tell him that no training or memo could heal the scar. Yet another part realized that at least Carlyle was here, in person, trying to make amends. It was more than she expected. You're also here because you need my help, Brielle said plainly. Skyline's expansion into Europe is in jeopardy, and I have a say in that. He pursed his lips. I won't lie, yes, that's partly why I came, but I'm not asking you to give us a free pass. We'll earn whatever approval we get. All I ask is that you judge us fairly. Don't let our worst mistake overshadow whatever merits our proposal might have. Brielle's eyes narrowed. Judge you fairly. That's ironic, considering how unfairly I was treated. Carlyle winced. I know. But please, let's move forward in a way that serves the greater good. Improved infrastructure, more jobs on both sides of the Atlantic, a better travel experience for everyone. For a long moment, Brielle said nothing. Then, with carefully measured words, she replied, I can't promise to forget what happened, but I can promise to be professional. Whether that results in Skyline's expansion going through or being blocked depends on what your airline genuinely does to rectify its practices. Carlyle nodded, relief tinged with apprehension. Thank you. I'll personally ensure that real changes occur. If you ever have concerns, you can reach me directly. They parted with no handshake this time, just a mutual understanding of a fragile truce. Brielle walked out of the lounge, feeling a swirl of conflict. Carlyle's apology and proposals seemed sincere, but sincerity often crumbles under corporate pressures. Still, Brielle had set her boundaries. She would remain objective, but she would not cover up any wrongdoing for Skyline's benefit. The next steps lay in the airline's hands and in the watchful eyes of the European Commission. The final round of negotiations took place in a massive auditorium within the European Commission complex. Delegates from various European countries sat at long tables, while representatives from different airlines, airport authorities, and infrastructure firms took their turns presenting. Skyline Airways had a sizable delegation led by Colonel White and Gina Huang. Brielle Fields represented Prime International alongside her colleagues and other experts. Over several days, each airline's expansion proposal was dissected. Committees reviewed route optimization, economic impact studies, legal compliance, and social responsibility records. The memory of Brielle's ordeal loomed over Skyline's delegation. But Colonel White and Huang tried to focus on data-driven arguments, touting the airline's potential to create jobs and streamline transatlantic travel. When it was Brielle's turn to speak on behalf of Prime International, she described the logistical and architectural benefits of expanding Heathrow's terminals, along with updates to existing infrastructure. She explained how certain gates could be allocated to handle larger passenger volumes, She then presented safety metrics and consumer satisfaction surveys, carefully noting that several airlines had shown improvements over the last year, but not glossing over the fact that Skyline's recent controversies had sparked concerns about their internal processes. She didn't vilify Skyline on stage. Her role was to present objective findings. Still, her neutral tone when discussing Skyline's failings felt damning enough. She pointed out data showing a spike in passenger complaints against the airline in the last few months, which correlated with the incident that went viral. Colonel White visibly stiffened, and Gina Huang exchanged worried glances with other Skyline members. Brielle concluded with a recommendation that all airlines, including Skyline, be required to submit detailed protocols to assure passenger rights, anti-discrimination measures, and transparent dispute resolution processes before final approval. Commissioner Bourdieu nodded in agreement. Several EU delegates, already wary of potential liabilities, seemed more inclined to impose stricter oversight. Finally, after all presentations were done, the Commission scheduled a private vote. The tension in the building was palpable. Skyline's entire future expansion hung in the balance, as did Brielle's credibility. She had acted as a fair advisor rather than someone seeking revenge, but her data-driven insights illuminated the airline's shortcomings. The next day, the Commission announced its decision. 3 of the 5 members of the review panel voted to postpone granting Skyline's request for a full expansion until the airline implemented and demonstrated measurable reforms. Skyline was allowed partial access, a fraction of the gate slots it had requested, but not the wide-scale presence it had been aggressively pursuing. Cheers and claps erupted among some delegates who believed stricter regulations were necessary. Others murmured that the Commission was meddling too deeply in corporate affairs. Skyline's representatives looked crestfallen, though they tried to maintain professional composure. Brielle sat quietly, feeling a mix of relief and gravity. This was not a total victory or total defeat for Skyline. It was a compromise that insisted on accountability. She couldn't ignore the part she played in revealing the airline's vulnerabilities. If Brielle hadn't been forcibly removed that day, and if public attention hadn't forced the Commission to scrutinize Skyline's policies more closely, the airline might have sailed through with full approval. As delegates filtered out of the auditorium, Brielle received a text from Rachel Jefferson back in the US. Saw the update. "Proud of you for standing firm. Justice served, even if partial." Brielle responded with a simple thank you, her heart heavy yet buoyed. She knew this was only one chapter in a broader struggle for equitable treatment in the travel industry. But at least, for now, Brielle had reclaimed some sense of power and dignity and reminded a global corporation that karma has a long memory. In the weeks following the European Commission's decision, Skyline Airways scrambled to repair its tarnished image. They hosted public forums, invited civil rights leaders to speak on improving company culture, and laid out a new passenger dignity policy. Colonel White was relieved from his security oversight role and reassigned. Several lower-level security employees were fired or suspended, though rumors spread that they were merely scapegoats. The airline also faced multiple lawsuits from other passengers, claiming similar discriminatory treatment in the past. Meanwhile, Brielle returned to New York to a hero's welcome from friends, family, and colleagues who recognized her courage. Prime International was pleased that Brielle had handled the situation with professionalism. She neither sabotaged Skyline nor let them off the hook. The partial expansion deal still brought significant work for Prime International, ensuring that Brielle's role in upcoming infrastructure projects would remain vital. True to her word, Brielle maintained an open line of communication with Skyline's leadership team. She even consulted briefly on their new anti-discrimination training programs, ensuring they weren't just PR fluff. It was an awkward alliance, but Brielle believed real change required engagement. She was determined that no one else would suffer the humiliation she had endured. On social media, the story of Brielle Fields evolved from a shocking viral incident to a narrative of resilience and reform. Influencers praised her decision not to bury Skyline outright, but to push them toward meaningful transformation. Activists lauded her as an example of turning personal trauma into systemic change. And ordinary travelers began recounting their improved experiences with Skyline's newly cautious and courteous staff, though many remained skeptical, waiting to see if it would last. Alan Carlisle publicly acknowledged Brielle's role in preventing what could have been a total shutdown of Skyline's European ambitions. In one interview, he said, "Miss Fields taught us a hard lesson. We cannot ignore the voices of those we serve. Moving forward, we commit to hearing those voices before they become outcries." Despite this, Brielle wasn't naive. She knew corporations often revert to old ways once public scrutiny fades. But for the moment, tangible steps were being taken: training sessions, policy rewrites, external audits, moves that would outlive the social media cycle if properly maintained. Brielle decided to remain watchful, occasionally checking in with the civil rights groups that had pressured Skyline. Accountability needed vigilance. Not all was rosy, of course. Some corners of the internet accused Brielle of profiteering from the incident or painted her as an angry black woman who exploited race to gain influence. Brielle had her share of hate mail and online harassment, but she found solace in the overwhelming support from those who saw the incident for what it was: a collision of prejudice, corporate negligence, and personal courage. In the quiet moments, Brielle would think back to that day at Gate 27, the fear in her heart, the cold tiles scraping her knees, the stares of strangers as she was dragged like a criminal. No amount of corporate apology could fully erase that wound, but as Brielle moved forward, she recognized that adversity had sharpened her resolve. She stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who deserves to travel, to work, and to live without the shadow of discrimination. And sometimes that's what karma looks like: not a single triumphant moment, but a series of shifts, small and large, that force injustice to unravel under the weight of truth. This story is more than a tale of humiliation and redemption. It's a wake-up call for every traveler who's been judged before they even reached their seat. It's a reminder that power doesn't only reside in boardrooms or executive lounges. It can emerge from a single voice that refuses to be silenced. If you found meaning in Brielle's journey, her stand against injustice, her resolve to remain fair, and her drive to enact real change, take a moment now to be part of this conversation. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration. Hit the like button if you believe in standing up for what's right, and subscribe for more stories that tackle the human struggle against systems meant to hold us back. Let's keep these issues in the spotlight and demand the accountability that every passenger, every person truly deserves.